Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Now, many podcasts put their promotion and cup rattling stuff halfway through or even towards the end. But because if all goes well, you're going to be asleep long before we get there, I need to put this stuff up front. The show is brought to you as always by supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from people all the time how valuable they find the show, and those supporters who have the means to help fund it, to keep it going, and help me to reach new audiences are very much appreciated. So if you're making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you deal with sleeplessness, and you have the urge to support the show, and most importantly, if you have the means, please check out patreon.com/sleepytimetales or go to the link in the show notes or from the website to take a look. Above all else, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to the rest and lifestyle improvement of thousands of people. And over and above that, there are real rewards available from as little as $2 a month. From early releases to weekly bonus episodes and special edits of the main show. There are other methods of support as well, also listed in the show notes if a monthly contribution seems a bit much for you. There's the Patreon, the tip jar, the merchandise store, and others. Speaking of the tip jar, I got another very nice contribution this week from Delane. She threw a little something in the tip jar, and as always, that is very much appreciated. But other than financial support, another huge way you can help is to help Sleepy Time Tales is simply to spread the word. If there is someone else in your life who you think will benefit from listening to it, just let them know. And if you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and I can thank you. That would be at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. And I often say I don't push reviews, but I do share the ones that I get when I get them. And I got a very nice one recently from Mary Beth on Apple Podcasts. It's a 5-star review called Awesome. She says, "Hey Dave, I usually listen on Spotify, but I re-downloaded Apple Podcasts just to leave this review. Got to tell you, Mary Beth, that is way more than is required, so it is very much appreciated. I've been listening for a while now, and I've only made it to the end a handful of times. Definitely the best sleep podcast I've found. I usually only put it on when I really can't sleep, and I got to tell you the other day, it was like 12:30 a.m. because I kept scrolling through my phone and I could not sleep, so I put on an episode. As an aside, people, I know most of you probably listening to this on your phone. Try not to look at the screen at night, especially these days. It's just going to make your life miserable." Back to Mary Beth. "Didn't even make it to, so relax, dear listener. You'll always be safe with me. Thanks, dude." You're very welcome. One other thing she says as well is one thing though, it's kind of weird how I can't put a face to a name. Maybe post a selfie on your IG or something so I know who my nighttime friend is. Also wish you would do more non-fiction. My favorite episode is the one about the turkeys, lol. I got to tell you, that turkey episode was one of the most agonizing things I ever recorded. It is so boring, so it must have been very effective for the listeners. It was one of the most difficult recordings and edits I did because it was also very repetitive and very confusing. I kept thinking I was going back and rereading stuff. And as for the putting my face to the voice thing, that's actually a fair point, to be honest. I'm asking folks to trust me and have me in their ears, and don't think I've ever shared a photo on any of my podcast social media. So by the time regular listeners are going to be listening to this, people not on the Patreon, you'll probably find a picture of my mug somewhere on Instagram and or Twitter. So if you're curious, I'll be there. Anyway, thank you very much, Mary Beth. That was a wonderful both a wonderful review and a bit of a call to action for me personally. So thank you very much for that. And I've gone on a bit long, so let me finish off with my usual obligatory shout out to the music, which is Un Désert by Kumiko. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked the website in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff that they've released under various names that I recommend checking out. Thanks for sticking with me this far. Back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a strange little idea after all, a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off again at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, sleep really was always a struggle for me. It was only later in life that I discovered the tendency for droning voices, especially male ones, funnily enough, to act almost like a sleeping pill or a tranquilizer for me. I'd come to terms with my insomnia, and I decided that I would go to bed at night and listen to podcasts because I was going to be lying awake most of the night anyway. And I'd suddenly find myself waking up having slept through everything that I was trying to listen to. I eventually realized what was going on. It took me longer than probably should have. And I started listening to other podcasts or back episodes of shows, specifically to help me sleep. I realized again after a while, or I discovered after a while, that there are shows out there specifically for that purpose. People telling stories or doing something to keep someone's mind occupied, while at the same time letting them gently drift into sleep. I discovered one particular show that worked really well for me, but when I recommended it to others, it didn't quite resonate. Sometimes they didn't like the narrator's voice, or they didn't like the way they told stories or something like that. So I thought to myself, I've got a boring, deep, drony voice. Let me see if I can step into that gap and try help others that the existing shows can't reach. And so here I am with Sleepy Time Tales, doing my small part to help. Now, every episode starts with this long intro, and it serves two very important purposes for two different types of listener. Now, obviously, first off, I need to explain to new listeners what the show is for, how I think it's worth engaging with, and the sort of the structure, how it's planned out to help you to get some sleep. Obviously, people have been listening to the show for a while, and there's some that have been listening to it, I'm pretty sure, for about 1.5 years now, practically since day one. They have a different relationship with this intro. For people who have been listening for a while, this intro is more something to help them prepare their space and prepare themselves to help create that habit that we're trying to do. We're trying to replace the bad habit of insomnia with the good habit of a good night's sleep. We're building a space here together, and this intro is an important part of that for many, many of the listeners. Now, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, the way I structure it is something that would appeal to me. For me, I need to listen. I need to have something to focus on. I need a story or an event or something that just helps me to keep my mind on a specific point to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties. I need to focus just enough to not resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for me. Some people may engage a little bit differently. It may seem to be something a little bit more primal. Maybe they just need some kind of white noise. Instead of the sound of the wind in the trees or the rain or the ocean, they just need a boring dude droning along, telling a not particularly interesting story. Tonight's story, we return to, I went blank on the name, to The Cossacks by Leo Tolstoy, who's obviously most famous for War and Peace. This is one of his earlier pieces about a young nobleman who's taken a posting halfway across Russia. But ultimately, the story itself doesn't really matter very much. It's just there to distract you, to keep your mind busy so that you don't fall asleep, something to keep a light mental grip on, to allow the need for sleep to come to you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's very important that you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, it very well, in fact, probably won't work for you. I recommend giving it probably about 3 nights to give it a solid try, because this is a bit of a strange thing. You may need to get used to listening to my voice or my accent, or maybe just this whole idea is a little bit weird and you have a sort of, I think, quite natural resistance to the idea. And I support that, and I do ask that you give it, as I say, a good solid 3 nights to get over any resistance you have. And if you don't get over it within 3 nights, you probably won't. Maybe I'm not the person to help you as much as I like to. It's also possible, especially early in the early days, that one episode just isn't long enough. In fact, that thing ties into another issue of mine, because what my problem when I struggle to sleep is lately I actually go to sleep okay. But I tend to wake up at 3 a.m. and I can't get back to sleep because my mind starts spinning out again. So what I do is I queue up a few episodes. I keep a whole bunch of the latest episodes of the shows I listen to downloaded, and I start with the latest one and I let them run all night. If I need more than one to help me sleep, then I've got that there for me. And also if I wake up in the middle of the night, which, as I say, is the more common issue for me right now, that voice that I'm so familiar with and has already given me a good night's rest, or a start of a good night's rest, is there waiting for me. So I suggest you do that with this show as well. Download a few episodes and have them ready, and then as you go in and out of sleep during the night, you'll find me here with you, keeping you company the whole way. And that whole way even goes as far as before the alarm goes. Sometimes I wake up about 30 minutes before my alarm, and I used to find that extremely frustrating. But lately what I do is I just carry on listening, and often I just go back to sleep again. There's something about allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that is satisfying on a deep level. It's very important, though, that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may all seem a bit strange to you, so give it a chance. And there you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I'll tell you a story. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who is elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or probably not all that small if I'm honest. People don't sleep very well these days and it makes life hard, so I'm here to do a small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep, and the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep and to a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and we'll try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it's not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life, and progress shining bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. This week we return to the Cossacks by Leo Tolstoy. Chapter 4. That whole part of the Terek line, about 50 miles, along which lie the inhabitants of Grebinet's Cossacks, is uniform in character both as to country and inhabitants. The Terek, which separates the Cossacks from the mountaineers, still flows turbid and rapid, though already broad and smooth, always depositing greyish sand on its low reedy right bank and washing away the steep, though not high, left bank, with its roots of century-old oaks, its rotting plane trees and young brushwood. On the right bank lie the villages of pro-Russian, though still somewhat restless Tartars. Along the left bank, back half a mile from the river and standing 5 or 6 miles apart from one another, are Cossack villages. In olden times, most of these villages were situated on the banks of the river, but the Terek, shifting northward from the mountains year by year, washed away those banks, and now there remain only the ruins of the old villages, and of the gardens of pear and plum trees and poplars, all overgrown with blackberry bushes and wild vines. No one lives there now, and one only sees the tracks of the deer, the wolves, the hares, and the pheasants who have learned to love these places. From village to village runs a road cut through a forest as a cannon shot might fly. Along the roads are cordons of Cossacks and watchtowers with sentinels in them. Only a narrow strip about 700 yards wide of fertile wooded soil belongs to the Cossacks. To the north of it begin the sand drifts of the Nogay or Mozdok steppes, which fetch far to the north and run heaven knows where, into the Trukman, Astrakhan and Kyrgyz-Kaysatsk steppes. To the south, beyond the Terek, are the great Chechnya River, the Kochkalov Range, the Black Mountains, yet another range, and at last the Snowy Mountains, which can just be seen but have never yet been scaled. In this fertile wooded strip, rich in vegetation, has dwelt as far back as memory runs the fine, warlike, and prosperous Russian tribe belonging to the sect of Old Believers, and called the Grebenesk Cossacks. Long ago, their Old Believer ancestors fled from Russia and settled along the Terek, among the Chechens on the Graben, the first range of wooden mountains of Chechnya. Living among the Chechens, the Cossacks intermarried with them and adopted the manners and customs of the hill tribes, though they still retained the Russian language in all its purity, as well as their old faith. A tradition, still fresh among them, declares that Tsar Ivan the Terrible came to the Tereks, sent for their elders and gave them the land on this side of the river, exhorting them to remain friendly to Russia and promising not to enforce his rule upon them, nor oblige them to change their faith. Even now, the Cossack families claim relationships with the Chechens, and the love of freedom, of leisure, of plunder, of war, still form their chief characteristics. Only the harmful side of Russian influence shows itself, by interference at elections, by confiscation of church bells, and by the troops who are quartered in the country or march through it. A Cossack is inclined to hate less the Dzigat hillsman who maybe has killed his brother, than the soldier quartered on him to defend his village, but has defiled his hut with tobacco smoke. He respects his enemy, the hillsman, and despises the soldier, who is in his eyes an alien and an oppressor. In reality, from a Cossack's point of view, a Russian peasant is a foreign, savage, despicable creature, of whom he seems a sample in the hawkers who come to the country, and in the Ukrainian immigrants who the Cossack contemptuously call wool-beaters. For him, to be smartly dressed means to be dressed like a Circassian. The best weapons are obtained from the hillsmen, and the best horses are bought or stolen from them. A dashing young Cossack likes to show off his knowledge of Tartar, and when carousing, talks Tartar even to his fellow Cossack. In spite of all these things, this small Christian clan, stranded in a tiny corner of the earth, surrounded by Mohammedan tribes and by soldiers, considers itself highly advanced, acknowledges none but Cossacks as human beings, and despises everyone else. The Cossack spends most of his time in the cordon, in action, or in hunting and fishing. He hardly ever works at home. When he stays in the village, it is an exception to the general rule, and then he is holiday making. All Cossacks make their own wine, and drunkenness is not so much a general tendency as a right, the non-fulfillment of which would be considered apostasy. The Cossack looks upon a woman as an instrument for his welfare. Only the unmarried girls are allowed to amuse themselves. A married woman has to work for her husband from youth to very old age. His demands on her are the oriental ones of submission and labor. In consequence of this outlook, women are strongly developed both physically and mentally. And though they are, as everywhere in the East, nominally in subjection, they possess far greater influence and importance in family life than Western women. Their exclusion from public life and inurement to heavy male labor give the women all more power and importance in the household. A Cossack who before strangers considers it improper to speak affectionately or needlessly to his wife, when alone with her is involuntarily conscious of her superiority. His house and all his property, in fact the entire homestead, has been acquired and is kept together solely by her labor and care. Though firmly convinced that labor is degrading to a Cossack and is only proper for a Norgay laborer or a woman, he is vaguely aware of the fact that all he makes use of and calls his own is the result of that toil, and that it is in the power of the woman, his mother or his wife, whom he considers his slave, to deprive him of all he possesses. Besides, the continuous performance of man's heavy work and the responsibilities entrusted to her have endowed the Grebensk woman with a peculiarly independent masculine character, and have remarkably developed their physical powers, common sense, resolution, and stability. The women are in most cases stronger, more intelligent, more developed, and handsomer than the men. A striking feature of a Grebensk woman's beauty is the combination of the purest Circassian type of face with the broad and powerful build of northern women. Cossack women wear the Circassian dress, a Tartar smock, beshmet, and soft slippers, but they tie their kerchiefs around their heads in the Russian fashion. Smartness, cleanliness, and elegance in dress and in the arrangements of their huts are with them a custom and a necessity. In their relations with men, the women, and especially the unmarried girls, enjoy perfect freedom. Novomlinsk village was considered the very heart of Grebensk Cossackdom. In it, more than elsewhere, the customs of the old Grebensk population have been preserved, and its women have from time immemorial been renowned all over the Caucasus for their beauty. A Cossack's livelihood is derived from vineyards and fruit gardens, watermelon and pumpkin plantations, from fishing, hunting, maize and millet growing, and from war plunder. Novomlinsk village lies about 2.5 miles away from the Terek, from which it is separated by a dense forest. On one side of the road which runs through the village is the river, on the other green vineyards and orchards, beyond which are seen the drift sands of the Nogay steppe. The village is surrounded by earth banks and prickly bramble hedges, and is entered by tall gates, hung between posts, and covered with little reed-thatched roofs. Beside them on a wooden gun carriage stands an unwieldy cannon captured by the Cossacks at some time or the other, and which has not been fired for 100 years. A uniformed Cossack sentinel with dagger and gun sometimes stands and sometimes does not stand on guard beside the gates, and sometimes presents arms to a passing officer and sometimes does not. Below the roof of a gateway is written in black letters on a whiteboard, Houses 266, male inhabitants 897, female 1012. The Cossacks' houses are all raised on pillars 2.5 feet from the ground. They are carefully thatched with reeds and have large carved gables. If not new, they are at least all straight and clean, with high porches of different shapes, and they're not built close together but have ample space around them, and all picturesquely placed along broad streets and lanes. In front of the large bright windows of many of the houses, beyond the kitchen gardens, dark green poplars and acacias with a delicate pale verdure and scented white blossoms overtop the houses. And beside them grow flaunting in yellow sunflowers, creepers and grapevines. In the broad open square are 3 shops where drapery, sunflower and pumpkin seeds, locust beans and gingerbreads are sold. And surrounded by a tall fence, loftier and larger than the other houses, stands the regimental commander's dwelling, with its casement windows behind a row of tall poplars. Few people are to be seen in the streets of the village on weekdays, especially in summer. The young men are on duty in the cordons or on military expeditions. The old ones are fishing or helping the women in the orchards and gardens. Only the very old, the sick and the children remain at home. Chapter 5. It was one of those wonderful evenings that occur only in the Caucasus. The sun had sunk behind the mountains, but it was still light. The evening glow had spread over by a third of the sky, and against this brilliancy the dull white immensity of the mountains was sharply defined. The air was rarefied, motionless and full of sound. The shadow of the mountains reached for several miles over the steppe. The steppe, the opposite side of the river, and the roads were all deserted. If very occasionally mounted men appeared, the Cossacks in the cordon and the Chechens in their auls, villages, watched them with surprised curiosity and tried to guess who these questionable men might be. At nightfall, people from fear of one another flocked to their dwellings, and only birds and beasts fearless of man prowl in these deserted spaces. Talking merrily, the women who have been tying up the vines hurry away from the gardens before sunset. The vineyards, like all the surrounding district, are deserted, but the villages become very animated at that time of the evening. From all sides, walking, riding, or driving in their creaking carts, people move towards the village. Girls with their smocks tucked up and twigs in their hands run chatting merrily to the village gates to meet the cattle that are crowding together in a cloud of dust and mosquitoes, which they bring with them from the steppe. The well-fed cows and buffaloes disperse at a run all over the streets, and Cossack women in coloured beshmets go to and fro among them. You can hear their merry laughter and shrieks mingling with the lowing of the cattle. There, an armed and mounted Cossack, on leave from the cordon, rides up to a hut and, leaning against the window, knocks. In answer to the knock, the handsome head of a young woman appears at the window, and you can hear caressing, laughing voices. There, a tattered Nogai labourer with prominent cheekbones brings a load of reeds from the steppes, turns his creaking cart into the Cossack captain's broad and clean courtyard, and lifts the yoke off the oxen that stand tossing their heads, while he and his master shout to another in Tartar. Past a puddle that reaches nearly across the street, a barefoot Cossack woman with a bundle of firewood on her back makes a laborious way by clinging to the fences, holding her smock high and exposing her white legs. A Cossack returning from shooting calls out in jest, "Lift it higher, shameless thing," and points his gun at her. The woman lets down her smock and drops the wood. An old Cossack, returning home from fishing with his trousers tucked up and his grey, hairy chest uncovered, has a net across his shoulder containing silvery fish that is still struggling, and to take a shortcut climbs over his neighbour's broken fence and gives a tug to his coat which is caught on the fence. There a woman is dragging a dry branch along, and from around the corner comes the sound of an axe. Cossack children, spinning their tops wherever there's a smooth place in the street, are shrieking. Women are climbing over fences to avoid going round. From every chimney rises the odious Cossack smoke. From every homestead comes the sound of increased bustle, precursor to the stillness of night. Granny Olitka, the wife of the Cossack cornet, who is also teacher in the regimental school, goes out to the gates of her yard, like the other women, and waits for the cattle which her daughter Maryanka is driving along the street. Before she has time fully to open the wattle gate in the fence, an enormous buffalo cow surrounded by mosquitoes rushes up bellowing and squeezes in. Several well-fed cows slowly follow her, their large eyes gazing with recognition at their mistress as they swish their sides with their tails. The beautiful and shapely Marianka enters at the gate, and throwing away her switch, quickly slams the gate to and rushes with all the speed of her nimble feet to separate and drive the cattle into their sheds. "Take off your slippers, you devil's wench," shouts the mother. "You've worn them into holes." Marianka is not at all offended at being called a devil's wench, but accepting it as a term of endearment, cheerfully goes on with her task. Her face is covered with a kerchief tied around her head. She is wearing a pink smock and a green beshmet. She disappears inside the lean-to shed in the yard, following the big fat cattle, and from the shed comes her voice as she speaks gently and persuasively to the buffalo. When she stands still, what a creature. "Come now, come, old dear." Soon the girl and the old woman pass from the shed to the dairy, carrying 2 large pots of milk, the day's yield. From the dairy chimney rises a thin cloud of Cossacks smoke. The milk is being used to make into clotted cream. The girl makes up the fire while her mother goes to the gate. Twilight has fallen on the village. The air is full of the smell of vegetables, cattle, and scented Cossacks smoke. From the gates and along the streets, Cossack women come running, carrying lighted rags. From the yard, one hears the snoring and quiet chewing of the cattle eased of their milk, while in the street only the voices of women and children sound as they call to one another. It is rare on a weekday to hear the drunken voice of a man. One of the Cossack wives, a tall, masculine old woman, approaches Granny Olitka from the homestead opposite and asks her for a light. In her hand she holds a rag. "Have you cleared up, Granny?" The girl is lighting the fire. "Is it fire you want?" says Granny Olitka, proud of being able to oblige her neighbour. Both women enter the hut and coarse hands, unused to dealing with small articles, tremblingly lift the lid of a matchbox, which is a rarity in the Caucasus. The masculine-looking newcomer sits down on the doorstep with the evident intention of having a chat. "And is your man at the school, mother?" she asked. "He's always teaching the youngsters, mother, but he writes that he'll come home for the holidays," said the cornet's wife. "Yes, he's a clever man, one sees. It all comes useful." "Of course it does. And my Lushkasha is at the cordon. They won't let him come home," said the visitor, though the cornet's wife had known this all long ago. She wanted to talk about Ulushkasha, whom she had lately fitted out for service in the Cossack regiment, and whom she wished to marry to the cornet's daughter, Marianka. "So he's at the cordon." "Here's mother. He's not been home since last holidays. The other day I sent him some shirts by Fomushkin. He says he's all right and that his superiors are satisfied. He says they are looking out for Abreks again. Lushkasha is happy, he says." "Ah, well, thank God," said the cornet's wife. "Snatcher is certainly the only word for him." Lukashka was surnamed the Snatcher because of his bravery in snatching a boy from a watery grave, and the cornet's wife alluded to this, wishing in her turn to say something agreeable to Lukashka's mother. "I thank God, mother, that he's a good son. He's a fine fellow. Everyone praises him," says Lukashka's mother. "All I wish is to get him married, and then I could die in peace." "Aren't there plenty of young women in the village?" answered the cornet's wife slyly, as she carefully replaced the lid of the matchbox with her horny hands. "Plenty, mother, plenty," remarked Lukashka's mother, shaking her head. "There's your girl now, your Marianka. That's the sort of girl. You'd have to search through the whole place to find another." The cornet's wife knows what Lukashka's mother is after, but though she believes him to be a good Cossack, she hangs back. First, because she is a cornet's wife and rich, Well, Lukashka is the son of a simple Cossack and fatherless. Secondly, because she does not want to part with her daughter yet, but chiefly because propriety demands it. Well, when Maryanka grows up, she'll be marriageable too, she answers soberly and modestly. I'll send the matchmakers to you. I'll send them. Only let me get the vineyard done, and then we'll come and make our bows to you, says Lukashka's mother. And we'll make our bows to Elias Vasilik too. Elias, indeed, said the corner's wife proudly. It's to me you must speak, all in its own good time. Lukashka's mother sees by the stern face of the corner's wife that is not the time to say anything more just now. So she lights her rag with a match and says, rising, Don't refuse us. Think of my words. I'll go. It is time to light the fire. As she crosses the road, swinging the burning rag, she meets Maryanka, who bows. Ah, she's a regular queen. A splendid worker, that girl, she thinks, looking at the beautiful maiden. What need for her to grow any more? It's time she was married and to a good home. Married to Lukashka. But Granny Ulutka had her own cares, and she remained sitting on the threshold, thinking hard about something, till the girl called her. Chapter 6. The male population of the village spend their times on military expeditions and in the cordon, or at their posts, as the Cossacks say. Towards evening, that same Lukashka the Snatcher, about whom the old women had been talking, was standing on a watchtower of the Nizhny Prototsk post, situated at the very banks of the Terek. Leaning on the railing of the tower and screwing up his eyes, he looked now far into the distance beyond the Terek, now down at his fellow Cossacks, and occasionally he addressed the latter. The sun was already approaching the snowy range that gleamed white above the fleecy clouds. The clouds undulating at the base of the mountain grew darker and darker. The clearness of evening was noticeable in the air. A sense of freshness came from the woods, though around the post it was still hot. The voices of the talking Cossacks vibrated more sonorously than before. The moving mass of the Terek's rapid brown waters contrasted more vividly with the motionless banks. The waters were beginning to subside, and here and there the wet sands gleamed drab on the banks and in the shallows. The other side of the river, just opposite the cordon, was deserted. Only an immense waste of low-growing reeds stretched far away to the very foot of the mountains. On the low bank, a little to one side, could be seen the flat-roofed clay houses and the funnel-shaped chimneys of a Chechen village. The sharp eyes of the Cossack who stood on the watchtower followed, through the evening smoke of the pro-Russian village, the tiny moving figures of the Chechen women visible in the distance in their red and blue garments. Although the Cossacks expected the Breks to cross over and attack them from the Tartar side at any moment, especially as it was May, when the woods by the Terek are so dense that it is difficult to pass through them on foot, and the river is shallow enough in places for a horseman to ford it, and despite the fact that a couple of days before a Cossack had arrived with a circular from the commander of the regiment announcing that spies had reported the intention of a party of some 8 men to cross the Terek, and ordering special vigilance. No special vigilance was being observed in the cordon. The Cossacks, unarmed and with their horses unsaddled, just as if they were at home, spent their time some in fishing, some in drinking, and some in hunting. Only the horse of the man on duty was saddled, and with its feet hobbled, was moving about by the brambles near the wood, and only the sentinel had his Circassian coat on and carried a gun and sword. The corporal, a tall thin Cossack with an exceptionally long back and small hands and feet, was sitting on the earth bank of a hut with his beshmet unbuttoned. On his face was the lazy, bored expression of a superior, and having shut his eyes he dropped his head upon the palm first of one hand and then of the other. An elderly Cossack with a broad greyish-black beard was lying in his shirt, girdled with a black strap, close to the river and gazing lazily at the waves of the Terek as they monotonously foamed and swirled. Others, also overcome by the heat and half naked, were rinsing clothes in the terek, plaiting a fishing line or humming tunes as they lay on the hot sand of the riverbank. One Cossack with a thin face much burnt by the sun lay near the hut, evidently dead drunk, by a wall which, though it had been in shadow some 2 hours previously, was now exposed to the sun's fierce slanting rays. Lukashka, who stood on the watchtower, was a tall, handsome lad, about 20 years old and very like his mother. His face and whole build, in spite of the angularity of youth, indicated great strength, both physical and moral. Though he had only lately joined the Cossacks at the front, it was evident from the expression of his face and the calm assurance of his attitude that he had already acquired the somewhat proud and warlike bearing peculiar to Cossacks, and to men generally who continually carry arms, and that he felt he was a Cossack and fully knew his own value. His ample Circassian coat was torn in some places. His cap was on the back of his head, Chechen fashion, and his leggings had slipped below his knees. His clothing was not rich, but he wore it with that peculiar Cossack foppishness which consists in imitating the Chechen brave. Everything on a real brave is ample, ragged and neglected, only his weapons are costly. But these ragged clothes and these weapons are belted and worn with a certain air and matched in a certain manner, neither of which can be acquired by everybody, and which at once strike the eye of a Cossack or hillsman. Lukashka had this resemblance to a brave. With his hands folded under his sword and his eyes nearly closed, he kept looking at the distant Tartar village. Taken separately, his features were not beautiful, but anyone who saw his stately carriage and his dark-browed, intelligent face would involuntarily say, "What a fine fellow." "Look at the women. What a lot of them are walking about in the village," said he in a sharp voice, languidly showing his brilliant white teeth and not addressing anyone in particular. Nazarka, who was lying below, immediately lifted his head and remarked, "They must be going for water." "Supposing one scared them with a gun," said Lukashka, laughing. "Wouldn't they be frightened?" "It wouldn't reach." "What? Mine would carry beyond." "Just wait a bit, and when their feast comes round, I'll go and visit Giray Khan and drink boozer there," said Lukashka, angrily swishing away the mosquitoes which attached themselves to him. A rustling in the thicket drew the Cossack's attention. A pied mongrel, half-setter, searching for a scent and violently wagging its scantily furred tail, came running to the cordon. Lukashka recognized the dog as one belonging to his neighbor, Uncle Eroshka, a hunter, and saw, following it through the thicket, the approaching figure of the hunter himself. Uncle Eroshka was a gigantic Cossack with a broad snow-white beard and such broad shoulders and chest that in the wood, where there was no one to compare him with, he did not look particularly tall, so well proportioned were his powerful limbs. He wore a tattered coat, and over the bands with which his legs were swathed, sandals made of undressed deer's hide tied on with strings, while on his head he had a rough little white cap. He carried over one shoulder a screen to hide behind when shooting pheasants, and a bag containing a hen for luring hawks, and a small falcon. Over the other shoulder, attached by a strap, was a wild cat he had killed, and stuck in his belt behind were some little bags containing bullets, gunpowder, and bread, a horse's tail to swish away the mosquitoes, a large dagger in a torn scabbard smeared with old bloodstains, and 2 dead pheasants. Having glanced at the cordon, he stopped. "Helium," he called to the dog in such a ringing bass that it awoke an echo far away in the wood. And throwing over his shoulder his big gun, of the kind the Cossacks call a flint, he raised his cap. "Had a good day? Good people, eh?" he said, addressing the Cossacks in the same strong and cheerful voice, quite without effort, but as loudly as if he were shouting to someone on the other side of the river. "Yes, yes, uncle," answered from all sides the voices of the young Cossacks. "What have you seen? Tell us," shouted Uncle Eroshka, wiping the sweat from his broad red face with the sleeve of his coat. "Oh, there's a vulture living in the plane tree here, uncle. As soon as night comes he begins hovering around," said Nazarka, winking and jerking his shoulder and leg, Come, come, said the old man incredulously. Really, uncle, you must keep watch, replied Nazarka with a laugh. The other Cossacks began laughing. The wag had not seen any vulture at all, but it had long been the custom of the young Cossacks in the cordon to tease and mislead Uncle Eroshka every time he came to them. You fool, always lying, exclaimed Lukashka from the tower to Nazarka. Nazarka was immediately silenced. It must be watched. I'll watch, answered the old man, to the great delight of all the Cossacks. But have you seen any boars? Watching for boars, are you? Said the corporal, bending forward and scratching his back with both hands, very pleased at the chance of some distraction. It's a Brex one has to hunt here and not boars. You've not heard anything, uncle, have you? He added, needlessly screwing up his eyes and showing his close-set white teeth. A Brex, said the old man. No, I haven't. I say, have you any chico? Let me have a drink, there's a good man. I'm really quite done up. When the time comes, I'll bring you some fresh meat, I really will. Give me a drink, he added. Well, and are you going to watch? Inquired the corporal, as though he had not heard what the other said. I did mean to watch tonight, replied Uncle Eroshka. Maybe with God's help I should kill something for the holiday. Then you shall have a share, you shall indeed. Uncle, hello, uncle, called out Lukashka sharply from above, attracting everyone's attention. All the Cossacks looked up at him. Just go to the upper watercourse, there's a fine herd of boars there. I'm not inventing, really. The other day one of our Cossacks shot one there. I'm telling you the truth, added he, readjusting the musket at his back, and in a tone that showed he was not joking. Ah, Lukashka, the snatcher is here, said the old man, looking up. Where has he been shooting? Haven't you seen? I suppose you're too young, said Lukashka. Close by the ditch. He went on seriously with a shake of the head. We were just going along the ditch when all at once we heard some crackling, but my gun was in its case. Elias fired suddenly, but I'll show you the place, it's not far. You just wait a bit. I know every one of their footpaths, Daddy Mosef, said he, turning resolutely and almost commandingly to the corporal. It's time to relieve guard. And holding aloft his gun, he began to descend from the watchtower without waiting for the order. Come down, said the corporal, after Lukashka had started and glanced around. Is it your turn, Gurkha? Then go. True enough, your Lukashka has become very skillful, he went on, addressing the old man. He keeps going on about just like you. He doesn't stay at home. The other day he killed a boar. And I think I'm going to call it there tonight. If you've enjoyed what you've heard so far, you can find the Cossacks on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiko. Get more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.